Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight's topics are more on Claudia's landslide in Mexico, and Pepe on the St. Petersburg Economic Conference. So, I see a number of you have arrived. Hi, Dee. Hi, Evelina. Nice to see you. And we have some others who have not announced themselves as yet. But I'm going to go right into, continue with the video I worked with on Saturday night on Claudia's victory, in Mexico. And this was a video that was cut by Ben Norton. And I'll show the rest of it, and then I'll comment on it as we're going through it. So here it is. The video is entitled Mexico's Political Rebellion. Following AMLO, new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, paves the multipolar path. And let's pick up where we left off on Saturday.
You know, it's not an exaggeration to say out of those conservative strongholds to weaken them. I do a lot of work with Venezuela, and Hugo Chavez has this incredible speech where he really well synthesizes Gramsci's conception of hegemony. Well, Morena and the forces that support it are establishing their new hegemony. And that's quite significant in terms of actually understanding that, you know, it's not an exaggeration to say that this is truly a watershed moment. How will they be able to respond? We quite possibly could be before a moment where these old pro-oligarchy forces will not be able to recover. And that.
So what he was talking about there, of course, was the internal struggle in Mexico between the oligarchy and the representatives of the people, the working class, the middle class. And he's talking about the rise of the Morena party in there. And also, given the strength of the landslide, he raises the question of whether the forces of oligarchy will be able to recover from this defeat.
Means that the interests of the working class will always be front and center. And you know what that means? That means we can actually start talking about things like the communalization of life, of actually breaking with these kind of straitjackets that capitalism imposes on us. Obviously, and I think we'll probably get into this a little bit later, there is still, and I think one of the major challenges is US imperialism. I think the more that they feel isolated, as we've seen in Bolivia, as we've seen in Nicaragua, as we've seen in Venezuela, right, as we've seen in Cuba, the opposition and their forces will run into the arms of imperialism because that's the only place where they feel like they have any hope of.
And the arms of imperialism, of course, means the arms of the United States. And they look for support from us to pose a threat, to the Morena party and to the victors in this landslide, in Mexico.
Recovering the power that they lost.
So, Jose Luis, in the introduction, I mentioned this statement that was published by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This is the main lobby group representing U.S. companies, and they warn of risks for the new president, Sheinbaum. And at the bottom of this, they note that there has been a wave of so-called protectionism in Mexico, which is really defending its economic sovereignty. They mention the fourth transformation of AMLO in pretty negative terms. And then they, in particular, mention the fact that under AMLO, Mexico has been exercising more control over its strategic natural resources, especially oil, but also other strategic minerals. And I mentioned that under AMLO, Mexico nationalized also its large lithium reserves. And in addition to oil and lithium, Mexico is a producer of gold, silver, copper, lead, zinc, natural gas, agricultural products. This is a country that's very rich in natural resources. And now that Sheinbaum is coming in, I mentioned that she has a PhD in energy engineering. She is a climate scientist. And the fact that she was involved in receiving a Nobel Prize is incredible, considering how scientifically illiterate many US politicians are who refuse to acknowledge that climate change is even real. And anyway, the point.
Can you imagine a US president ever being someone who was involved in getting a Nobel Prize? Now, I know Barack Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize, but I'm talking about a Nobel Prize for science. Can you ever imagine us having a president that won such a prize? I can't.
Point is that this is a moment that's very important for Mexico economically, not only with the geopolitical conflicts, which I want to ask you about in the next question, but also with climate change, with the move toward renewable energy technology, green technology. Mexico has a lot of potential. There is a lot of investment going on right now in Mexico. And with this US idea of so-called friendshoring, it's pressuring companies to withdraw from China and instead friendshore and invest in Mexico. And China, for its part, many Chinese companies are also investing in Mexico, in particular in green technology areas, electric vehicles. In fact, Mexico right now has a lot of interest from Chinese electric vehicle makers like BYD, the world's leading EV maker, and Tesla. Elon Musk wants to create a big factory in Mexico. So there's a lot of interest. And of course, given the fact that Sheinbaum has this background, I think she's going to take advantage of that and encourage the production of renewable energy technology. So what is your view of the situation of the economy in Mexico, the foreign investment, the potential for more good industrial jobs, manufacturing jobs, and what role Mexico can play in the transition away from fossil fuels while still maintaining national control over its natural resources and using them while we're transitioning, still using those resources to fund social programs and economic development?
Yeah, if you go to my Twitter account, you'll see my banner image. And it's actually from that demonstration that you talked about previously of López Obrador defending national sovereignty, which happened in the context of celebrating here in Mexico. We literally have a holiday to celebrate the expropriation of the oil industry. And so on this occasion, March 18th, they hold this huge demonstration, fill up the Zócalo. And on one of the buildings that faces this big, huge plaza in the heart of Mexico City was this image, where on the left was Lázaro Cárdenas, and it said the expropriation of the oil industry. And then on the right, there was López Mateos, who expropriated the electricity industry. And in the middle was López Obrador, who expropriated, nationalized lithium in this country. It gives you an idea of, we talked about this previously, of this kind of continuity. This is part of a program that is recovering the best of Mexican political history. But it also speaks to the economic agenda of this country, and under López Obrador and under Claudia Sheinbaum, which is going to be, no one says investment isn't welcome here. Like you said, Elon Musk, right-wing reactionary in many ways, came to Mexico to talk about opening a plant, although it actually hasn't progressed. There was a lot of noise, but then ultimately nothing has happened as of yet. Mexico, under López Obrador, became the #1 trading partner of the United States. It's not China, it's not Canada, it's Mexico. And so there's still clearly, an interest and willingness to engage with private capital, to engage with investment, to obviously participate in international trade. We live in a world that is very much interconnected, particularly Mexico, because of the North American Free Trade Agreement, now called something else. There is integrated supply lines. No one says that is, an issue. The point that we're trying to make here in Mexico under this government is that there need to be good wages. People need to have social security. You need to have access to a democratic trade union, all of these kinds of things that we didn't have before. I always kind of talk about how was the PRI able to maintain this dictatorship? Well, the bargain was this. Okay, you're not going to have democratic unions. You're not really going to have much of an actual democracy, but you're going to have a good standard of life. That was the bargain. Well, that bargain ended up evaporating under neoliberalism, where now you had the worst of both worlds. You have to engage with the interests of the ruling class, the transnational capital, and you're not going to get really much in exchange. You're going to have a pittance of a wage. You're going to be, what's that called? Outsourced your job, all this kinds of things. These contracts that don't provide any kind of stability or security. And one of the priorities of López Obrador and now Claudia Sheinbaum is to change that, to make it so that, for example, you mentioned nearshoring or friendshoring. Sure, you want to build things so that you have, your supply chain a little bit closer. You want to break away from reliance on manufacturing in China for whatever reason. Then sure, build here, but it's going to be under different circumstances. You're not going to be able to just walk all over the working class the way that it was before. On the issue of climate change, it's interesting because, gosh, the mainstream media coverage of Mexico and Sheinbaum in particular has just been atrocious, right? They almost always led with things like, she's his handpicked successor, ignoring that there was actually a process to decide who was going to be the candidate. And as I mentioned, was actually a contentious bit of kind of competition that threatened to weaken the unity of the party. Or they'll say that she'll never live out of his shadow, or that the fact that, like, well, she may have been a climate scientist, but she backed his interest in these dirty oil producing projects, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the thing. When we talk about the climate, when we talk about carbon economy, the emissions and all of that, I think it's always important to have an anti-imperialist perspective. Who have been the countries that have historically contributed the most to greenhouse gas emissions, to climate change, to the reason we're in this situation, right? For example, Mexico City now is in the midst of its third heat wave. We are paying the price of this. But who caused it? Western Europe. It's North America. It's the US and Canada. It's Australia. It's Japan. They're the ones who are responsible for this, and they're the ones who have to take action. I'm not going to be lectured by somebody like Joe Biden, who opened up drilling in Alaska, about the refinery that López Obrador built in order to guarantee energy security in Mexico. Do we need to do more? Of course. Everybody needs to do more. But this idea that the responsibility falls upon the global South because it wants to use its resources to go and plow it back into the nation, into the hands of the people, I think is supremely unfair to try to pin it on the global South. And that's what they do. It's an extension of imperialism. One of the criticisms they often made was that, oh, López Obrador decided to re-emphasize, the state-owned, like we saw in that Chamber of Commerce image there, industries and the state-owned energy producers. Well, that's because these reforms that were passed under the neoliberal president, Peña Nieto, they were sweetheart deals to private companies, right, from Spain, who wanted to, under the guise of producing green energy, basically leach resources out of the population, out of the state. There were actually, the contract said that the state transmission company was obligated to buy energy from them first, even if it was more expensive, even if it was less reliable, to the detriment to the interests of the population, who had to pay more and had less reliable service. How is that better? It was just a way of masking what is the same thing, this interest of transnational capital to penetrate the global South, to get its teeth into our resources and get rich, and then expropriate the assets and take them back to their home countries, to their investors and things like that. So people who talk about that are absurd. There was actually one good article that came out that talked about the fact that, if you're talking about wanting to get companies to change, to start to rely more on green energy and things like that, what makes more sense? Floating incentives out there so that private companies might take them up and might actually do it, or have a state-owned, state-controlled organization or company that you can just mandate, hey, you have to do things this way. And
Now that's a critical question for the United States. If we really want to do green, oughtn't we just to put some incentives out there? Or should the government be leading the way in this particular transformation? It's such a necessary transformation. Can we really rely on private companies? When we work with them by putting incentives out there, what we have to do is make those incentives attractive enough for the private companies to take the bait. And that always means that they get to leech off too much of the profits. Essentially, the government funds, the government takes the risks. If the private companies happen to lose money, then the people in the private companies haven't taken too much risk. But if they're profitable, then they benefit, okay, from the profits. The public does not benefit, okay, from the profits. Okay, so is Luis talking about an increase of socialism, okay, in Mexico? When you can look at that, okay, in that way, but I don't know that I've seen anything that he said here so far that he's really talking about anything other than social democracy and the government actually leading the way in certain areas that are critical to national security.
I do think that one of the things where we'll probably see a bit of a shift from López Obrador, he's a man of the 70s, right? The oil boom of Mexico. Is that Claudia Sheinbaum is likely to invest more in green energy initiatives, right? She led some pretty interesting ones here in Mexico City. Mexico City is a behemoth of a city. It's incredible that it works at all. And the way that the city is fed is this place called the Central del Bastos, which is just this massive complex where food is distributed to the entire region. She built solar panels on top of that to generate energy. It's the largest project of its kind in a major urban center. It gives you an idea of the way that you can do things that are state-led and that actually produce results. You want to mitigate the effects of climate change? Do that. I'll give you another example. Boy, does the wealthy class in this country love to lament the fact that López Obrador canceled this massive airport that they wanted to build on what used to be a lake. I can't imagine what this heat wave would feel like if they had been successful in paving over the lake, right? That absorbs so much of the heat. It'd be unbearable. Instead of being at 35 degrees, we'd be at 40 degrees. I'm so glad he didn't.
When he talks about 35 degrees, he means Celsius. So if not for that lake, it would have gone up to 40 degrees Celsius. But can you even imagine 35 degrees Celsius here? How hot it must be there? Incredible. 35 degrees Celsius. Oh my God.
Pursue that project and build a different airport, right? These are the kinds of arguments that I think they fall flat on their face because they're just ways of masking the interests of transnational capital. And I think if we're looking at actually improving people's lives, it's much, much more sane to put an emphasis on state-led initiatives the way that López Obrador and Claudia Sheinbaum is set to do.
Yeah, another example is that AMLO nationalized the energy grid, which had been partially privatized as well. And in fact, the US government was trying to take legal action to punish Mexico because US companies could no longer invest in the privatization of Mexico's energy grid. So we see many examples of this. It's deeply hypocritical. Now the US is spending literally trillions of dollars on its own industrial policy through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Chips and Science Act, in order to try to bring industrial jobs back to the US. But when Mexico tries to protect its economic sovereignty, then, oh, well, that's bad, that's evil, it's socialism. Well, I want to also talk about the geopolitics, because, of course, this is very important. We see that many US politicians have been invoking the Monroe Doctrine, this 200-year-old colonial doctrine, telling sovereign countries in Latin America that they cannot have good relations with China and Russia. And Mexico, being the U.S. neighbor, largest trading partner of the U.S., has really been hit hard by this. But in his defense, AMLO has stood up for Mexico's national interests. In 2023, he met with President Xi, and China and Mexico signed an agreement pledging to deepen their relations. And there was another very interesting moment that I wrote an article about back in 2022, in which the US government was using media outlets to accuse Mexico of hosting more Russian spies than any other country, of course, with no evidence, but they were attacking Mexico. This is part of this years-long US government campaign to demonize AMLO's government. And in response, in one of his morning press briefings, the Mañaneras, AMLO criticized the US and he said, Mexico is not a colony, criticizing this idea that Russians are not allowed to live in Mexico and also disputing the fact that they were supposedly spies. And what we've seen is that the US has really been trying to pressure Mexico to cut off relations with China and Russia, but Mexico has been saying, no, we're non-aligned. We're officially non-aligned. And in fact, Mexico had been a part of the original non-aligned movement. And what we've also seen, what's incredible, is that under AMLO and Morena, we've seen that Mexico is returning to this policy that goes back to the 1930s, which is known as the Estrada Doctrine, which used to be Mexico's foreign policy. It was not aligned for 100 years, basically, saying we are not going to ally with one of these major powers. We're going to pursue our own independent national interests. And now we see Mexico today returning to that policy after, in the neoliberal era, especially in the 90s and 2000s, it really just became a kind of proxy of the US. So can you talk about how you've seen Mexico's foreign policy shift? And then after, I want to ask you about in terms of Latin American integration. Let's talk more generally now about global politics.
Yeah, I mean, no to the new Cold War with China, right? And Mexico is on the right side of history when it comes to that. There are very powerful forces that are very much interested in ratcheting up that tension to the detriment of possibly the future of humanity. Do we really want to play that game? I mean,
so that point is a very, very central point. Our neighbor, our southern neighbor, is getting out from under the neoliberals and getting out from under when it comes to following the United States down whatever rabbit hole the United States decides to go down. I think it's a clear statement. It represents what Claudia thinks. It represents what the Morena Party thinks. They are not going to follow the lead of the United States in creating a new conflict with China.
Yeah. Who's going to win? It's going to be the people at the top, and meanwhile, the rest of us are going to have to suffer. So I'm very proud of the fact that we returned to that kind of policy and are pursuing healthy relationships. And I'll give you like an anecdote to talk about what that means up here as somebody living in Mexico City. Mexico City under Claudia Sheinbaum, where she was previously the governor, renewed its fleet of vehicles for public transportation. And almost all of them are Chinese made. They're Yutong or the BYD, right? And you know, the line that is closest to me is entirely 100% electric buses. And that's the kind of, we were talking about climate change. Those are the kinds of things that matter. And we were able to afford these vehicles because guess what? China makes cheaper vehicles. And I'm glad that they make them, because that means that we're actually able to afford them and renew them, and now service is more reliable. These are the kinds of things like, you know, it's funny, these pundits, they move around in Uber or they move around in their private vehicles. Some of them even have chauffeurs, right? Well, you know, the rest of us, the majority of us, this is how we have to live and work. And, you know, it's a lot better to be able to have that reliable transit, that safe, clean, new vehicle. In fact, sometimes I'll always be like, let's take this route because it's actually more comfortable. These are the kinds of things that very kind of tangible ways that relationship is translating into. And at the same time, he's also, you know, kind of letting who's ever interested in participate and not really favor them either, right? There was a bit of a negotiation there to try to see if they could give preferential deals, and ultimately that didn't come through. But that didn't stop Chinese investment here in Mexico. There's been an explosion of it, and it's welcomed for the same reason, right? Come, you know, if you're interested in investing, if you want to have access to the U.S. market by investing in Mexico. It's funny how sometimes they'll even vilify that. Oh, they're trying to sneak in through the back door. Absurd, right? You know, these are the same free market ideologues who are now imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese products. But if you want to come, fine, right? But make sure that you are abiding by our laws and all of this. But on the bigger picture, right? So we were talking about the geopolitical situation. Mexico occupying this space, you know, it's an important diplomatic country. It punches above its weight. It is the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. It is the second largest economy in Latin America. It's important that Mexico have this kind of leadership on the global stage to resist things. I know we're going to get into Latin America in a second here, but I do want to mention things like, for example, recognizing and respecting the sovereignty of other countries, of not falling into this trap of playing these regime change kind of games that the US pushes into. We always compare things to the previous regime. Enrique Peña Nieto was a leading figure in the so-called Lima group that sought to oust Nicolás Maduro from power. That ended with López Obrador. And in fact, that's been positive news for the Venezuelan people. I'll give you another example. In the case of Cuba, right? There is pressure from the Treasury Department in the US because Pemex is selling oil to Cuba. And López Obrador in his mañanera had an excellent response. I loved it because he's like, let me just say this once and for all, so it's clear to everybody. We will sell to Cuba because they're a good people, and if we want to sell to them, we will. That kind of dignity is really important, and that's projected globally, right? You haven't seen Mexico fall into this game of trying to join the efforts to attack Russia in the context of the Ukraine conflict, right? What has been Mexico's position? Peaceful resolution to this conflict. We have obviously the issue of our day, which is the conflict in the genocidal campaign Israel is waging in Palestine. What has been Mexico's position? And I think in some ways it's a little bit tepid in the sense that it could be stronger and calling out the genocide on a more consistent basis. But Mexico is one of the few countries that has signed on to the ICJ case that's happening together with Nicaragua, right? And Chile, I believe, just recently joined as well. So it's only a handful of countries saying, no, we need to trust in these institutions. You created these institutions. These are yours. These are part of your, international world order. Well, let's actually be consequential about it. That's important. And a country like Mexico taking that position is important. Mexico, under López Obrador, recognized the state of Palestine. It's one of the few countries in Latin America that hadn't done it yet. I'm glad that is happening.
So, increased independence of Mexico in foreign policy as well. The recognition of Palestine, so important. Signing on to the ICJ case, so important. He didn't mention whether they signed on to the ICC case yet, but let's see.
The world is changing. If you want to stay with the old order that is collapsing, that is lashing out, I think honestly you're setting yourself up for failure. Embrace a multipolar world. Embrace a world where there is a positive relationship, yes, with Biden, but also with Putin and Xi Jinping. There's nothing wrong with that, particularly in the global South. I love this quote. I forget who says it, so my apologies to it. But they say that when the United States visits the global South, we get a lecture. When China visits the global South, we get hospitals and bridges and roads. So who are we going to work with? Well, the people who want to work with us. And I think that makes perfect logical sense. The only people who object to that are people who are actually hiding the true interest behind that, which is defending that old US-led imperialist order.
Yeah, and Mexico represents the view that most countries in the global South have, which is that they don't want war. They certainly don't want a new Cold War. They want to develop, and they are willing to work with any country that respects their sovereignty. And increasingly, it's the US that does not respect their sovereignty, and China and Russia that do. And in the so-called democracy summit that Joe Biden organized, in fact, AMLO gave this very, indirect criticism of the US where he condemned oligarchy. And he said, we shouldn't have countries that claim to be democracies that are actually oligarchies, referencing comments that he had previously made when the US State Department published these reports condemning Mexico and meddling in its internal politics and in judicial reform. And in return, AMLO, in one of his morning press briefings, said that the US is an oligarchy, and he said Mexico is more democratic than the US. And we can see in these elections that it genuinely is more democratic, although, of course, the US is so undemocratic, it's a very low-hanging fruit. But on the subject of Latin America, this is, of course, so important. And when we're talking about Mexico's foreign policy, AMLO himself had always been much more focused on domestic politics. But one of the things that he really did emphasize is increasing integration with Latin America, which is important because in the past few decades with the neoliberal and right-wing leaders in Mexico, most of them simply looked to the north, to the US in terms of their foreign policy, and basically did whatever Washington wanted. But what we've now seen is we talked about, good relations with China and Russia, but also AMLO played an important role in calling for the end to the illegal 6-decade-long US blockade against Cuba. He called for an end to the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, and he was a big supporter of regional integration through organizations like the CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. And in 2021, Mexico City held the CELAC summit. And famously, in one of his press briefings, AMLO also joked about how the Organization of American States was completely irrelevant. This is the US-dominated OAS based in Washington, which has been used to try to overthrow governments like in Venezuela or Bolivia, backing coups, or to meddle in their internal affairs. And AMLO quoted this song by a revolutionary Cuban singer who, there was this famous song by Carlos Puebla who said, the OAS is so ugly, it makes you laugh, ha, ha, ha. So, I mean, the fact that the southern neighbor of the U.S. was criticizing the U.S. oligarchy, condemning U.S. meddling in the region and blockades and sanctions, and calling for Latin America to unite. I mean, this is absolutely historic. How do you think that will continue going forward under President Sheinbaum? And within Morena and within the social movements in Mexico, what do people think about the role of Mexico in integrating with Latin America and not only looking north, but also looking south?
So that was one great question from Ben. Let's hear the answer.
It's a point of pride for people who are supporters of Morena. This means a lot to occupy that place, to responsibly use that position. Like I mentioned, being the largest Spanish-speaking country, to be one of the major economies in the region, but also kind of being that buffer. We are the ones that have to have the United States on our border, and there is a risk to taking these kinds of positions. But it's been interesting to see how it's no skin off López Obrador's back to take these positions, and despite the tremendous pressure that they do apply against the government to try to get them to align with the interests of U.S. imperialism. And as you said, there's these great examples of him, quoting Simón Bolívar and talking about Latin American integration, about mocking the OAS, et cetera, et cetera. This is it's not just symbolic because it's been consequential as well, but it is a point of pride. During this election, I accompanied international observers like Jorge Arriaza from Venezuela, right? There was Clara López Obregón from Colombia. There was a number of other people who come from different parts of Latin America who similarly feel the same way. We have a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a camaraderie that we should be there for each other and supporting each other and defending the sovereignty of each other and respecting the democratic mandates that are emanating from our peoples, of having that kind of two-way relationship with Latin America, of resisting this urge to align ourselves with this powerful bloc that is U.S.-led. And I think with Claudia Sheinbaum, it's going to continue. I mean, it is one of the pillars of this project. We talk about soberanía, right? There's a reason we named the podcast that. It's one of the pillars of the fourth transformation of Mexico. But it's not just soberanía for me and none for you, right? It's sovereignty for all and respecting the sovereignty of all. And it makes for a much more positive relationship. I would love to highlight for a minute here the role in rescuing CELAC. So CELAC was born out of an initiative led by Hugo Chavez, right? And it came in that context of that first pink wave of Latin America. We saw leftist and progressive governments elected. It's not an accident that when there was that conservative restoration, when the pendulum swung the other way, that one of the first things they tried to do was destroy CELAC, destroy UNASUR, because they understood that regional unity does represent a threat to U.S. hegemony. And I'm so glad that Mexico took on the challenge of rescuing it and putting it back, of lifting it up. There are other initiatives. Grupo de Puebla is very active here in Mexico. They were active sending a delegation. Alberto Fernandez was in town as well here, participating as an election observer. So it's important that we have these spaces. And Mexico is uniquely positioned of being able to do it. I think it's easier to demonize countries that are far away and maybe lack the resources to be able to really kind of invest to make sure that these initiatives are able to succeed, and it's paying off, right? We went from a period where there was this absurd notion that all of these countries throughout the globe recognized this guy who raised his hand in the Mismo Plaza in Caracas as president of Venezuela. I think Mexico's role in defense of Venezuela's democracy and sovereignty was really, really key. I always tell this anecdote. So if we remember that day when Juan Guaidó declared himself president of Venezuela.
Juan Guaidó was, of course, the lead figure in the United States in a coup that was backed by the United States. It got nowhere, of course, okay, in Venezuela, but okay, as Luis is saying here, a key role was played, okay, by Mexico in failing to create any support for that very stupid move by the United States.
It was a scary moment for those of us who have always accompanied Venezuela. I remember thinking, I was like, how are they going to get out of this one? This is serious. This was clearly planned ahead. This is playing to a certain script. And I was watching it live, the way that country after country that at the time was ruled by right-wing presidents in the region were recognizing him as president. The momentum is against us. Where is this going to go? And then around 11 o'clock in the morning, Mexico issues a statement saying, no, we don't recognize this guy. Right? We have a relationship with the government of Nicolas Maduro. And that stopped that momentum. Suddenly it wasn't that convincing of a case to be like, oh, well, no, there's regional consensus. All of his neighbors no longer recognize him. Actually, one of the major economies in the region says no. And that really disrupted the narrative. And thanks to that, the coup wasn't successful, and now Venezuela's been in a much better position. Mexico received a lot of criticism for inviting Maduro to that CELAC summit. But I will tell you that from here, the view from the bottom, so forget the pundits, forget all of these voices that you usually hear, it meant a lot to us to have that kind of positive relationship with our friends and neighbors. And it's very important. I don't imagine a scenario where Claudia Sheinbaum breaks with that. Again, we have to emphasize this. She comes from the left. She has been schooled in these same kinds of ideas and traditions. And if anything, she's better positioned to be able to say it because she has a strengthened economy, she has a strengthened mandate, who can really tell her to change her position. And if they think that she's going to be more susceptible to pressure, I think they're sorely mistaken.
Okay, so that's enough of that, or at least it's all we have time for. But if you want to see the whole thing, I certainly recommend it. I have the link, okay, in the description. It's, I think, a very, very important video. What I think it shows us is that what we can expect from Claudia Sheinbaum is continuity with the AMLO regime and a further move to the left with respect to green energy. And in foreign policy, a further move to the left with respect to supporting the pink tide, okay, in Latin America, and supporting the integration of the nations, okay, of Latin America, and frankly, their rejection of the imperialism of the United States. And that is really so important for the future of the Western Hemisphere, and of course, very, very important for Mexico, okay, as well. Okay, I think Luis has it right here. Claudia Sheinbaum is a person on the left. That's the way she was educated. That's the way she was brought along. And he thinks, and he knows a lot more about her than I, he thinks she's going to continue on the path of her life and that she's not going to betray where she came from. So, okay, I think that's all for that. Now I want to move to Pepe Escobar and the article of his that we're taking up here tonight. So let me share that one with you. Okay, Evelina says, hi all. Evelina says, Jill Stein, God, I so hope it's Jill Stein. I mean, right now, she is, to me, the most acceptable candidate for the presidency. Evelina says, good to have articulate English speaking spokespeople for Latin America. Kay says, hi, D and Joe. Hi, Kay. And Evelina says, UNASUR was an Argentine project led by former President Nestor Kirchner. Yes, I know. I know it was. Boy, I hope something could be done about what happened in Argentina. Boy, I think Argentina is in grave trouble right now. Anyway, onward to Pepe's piece. This is about the recent St. Petersburg conference and his impressions concerning the conference. It's a fairly new piece, so he doesn't have too many comments yet. In fact, let me do a refresh on that, see if there are more comments. Yeah, it went up to 96 comments with 36 new ones, but okay, I am sharing it. Good. So it's entitled The Three Key Messages from St. Petersburg to the Global Majority. And it was written on June 10th, 2024 by Pepe Escobar. I believe it comes from the Strategic Culture Foundation, of course. Let me get that clear. No, it was republished from Sputnik by permission of the author, okay, or representative. So here's a picture of Putin shaking hands with who, it doesn't say, but of course it's from the conference, and there's someone, I believe, from South Africa standing to Putin's left. And he's shaking hands with someone to his right. I don't know who, there's no caption. In the year of the Russian presidency of BRICS, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, SPIEF, had to deliver something special. And deliver it did. Over 21,000 people, representing no less than 139 nations, a true microcosm of the global majority, discussing every facet of the drive towards a multipolar, multinodal, polycentric world. Okay, what's a multinodal world? Well, it refers to the network and the nodes, okay, of a network. Having multiple nodes, okay, in the network. Not all the nodes are going to be poles, but it's going to have network connectivity in his conception, and it's going to be polycentric. St. Petersburg, beyond all the networking and the frantic deal making, $78 billion worth of business clenched in only 3 days. I think it was only 2.5 days actually, crafted 3 intertwined key messages already resonating all across the global majority. Message number 1, President Putin, a quote, European Russian, unquote, and true son of this dazzling, dynamic, historic marvel by the Neva, delivered an extremely detailed 1-hour speech on the Russian economy at the forum's plenary session. The key takeaway, as the collective West launched total economic war against Russia, the civilization state turned it around and positioned itself as the world's 4th largest economy by purchasing power. By purchasing power parity, or PPP. Sorry. Putin showed how Russia still carries the potential to launch no less than 9 sweeping global structural changes, an all-out drive involving the federal, regional, and municipal spheres. Everything is in play, from global trade and the labor market to digital platforms, modern technologies, strengthening small and medium-sized businesses, and exploring the still untapped phenomenal potential of Russia's regions. What was made perfectly clear is how Russia managed to reposition itself beyond sidestepping the illegitimate sanctions tsunami to establish a solid, diversified system oriented towards global trade and completely linked to the expansion of BRICS. Russia-friendly states already account for 3/4 of Moscow's trade turnover. Putin's emphasis on the global majority's accelerated drive to strengthen sovereignty was directly linked to the collective West doing its best, rather worst, to undermine trust in their own payment infrastructure. And that leads us to Glatziev and Dilma rock the boat. And that leads us to Glatziev and Dilma rock the boat. I think that's coming up here. But message number 2, that was arguably the major breakthrough in St. Petersburg. Putin stated how the BRICS are working on their own payment infrastructure, independent from pressure, sanctions by the collective West. And there's a link there to an article from Sputnik. Okay, we're not going to go through that article, but it's a news article about various people involved in the de-dollarization. It's from the 13th of May, 2024. Independent from pressure, sanctions by the collective West. Putin had a special meeting with Dilma Rousseff, president of the BRICS New Development Bank, the NDB. They did talk in detail about the bank's development, and most of all, was later confirmed by Rousseff about the unit. If you recall, I covered the unit about 2 weeks ago here. Okay, it's the new currency being considered by Russia, by the BRICS nations. Anyway, about the unit whose lineaments were first revealed exclusively by Sputnik, an apolitical, transactional form of cross-border payments anchored in gold, 40%, and BRICS plus currencies, 60%. And in my treatment of this 2 weeks ago, I expressed some skepticism about anchoring it in gold, and raised some questions as to whether this would constrain development or not, rather than anchoring it completely in BRICS plus currencies, BRICS plus the fiat currencies. That would have been. The day after meeting Putin, President Dilma had an even more crucial meeting at 10 a.m. in a private room at SPIF with Sergei Glatziev, the Minister for Macroeconomy at the Eurasia Economic Union, and member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Baglatiev, who had previously provided full academic backing to the unit concept, explained all the details to President Dilma. Oh, by the way, for those who don't know, President Dilma is the former president of Brazil. They were both extremely pleased with the meeting. A beaming Rousseff revealed that she had already discussed the unit with Putin. It was agreed there will be a special conference at the NDB in Shanghai on the unit in September. So that's coming up. That's another move towards the BRICS adopting the unit as their currency. This means the new payment system has every chance to be at the table during the BRICS summit in October in Kazan and be adopted by the current BRICS 10 and the near future expanded BRICS. And of course, there is tremendous talk going around that perhaps as many as 40 new nations will be added to BRICS. There are some 59 new nations interested, but talk about adding at least 40. That remains to be seen. That would be a huge jump from 10 to 40. Now to message number 3. It had to be, of course, about BRICS, which everyone, Putin included, stressed will be significantly expanded. The quality of the BRICS-related sessions in St. Petersburg demonstrated how the global majority is now facing a unique historical juncture, with a real possibility for the first time in the last 250 years to go all out for a structural change of the world system. When we go back 250 years, we're talking about 1775 or 1774 off the top of my head as the last real structural change of the world system. I would think it's more than 250 years, but continuing. And it's not only about BRICS. It was confirmed in St. Petersburg that no less than 59 nations and counting plan to join not only BRICS, but also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union, the EU. These 3 organizations are key organizations in the restructuring of the world economy and the world society. They've been slowly developing over the last 20 years, or so, but they are now emerging as a coherent structure. No wonder these multilateral organizations now finally have established themselves on the forefront of the drive towards this. That should say they're the multinodal rather than the multimodal, italics mine, and to quote Putin in his address, quote, harmonic, multi-polar world, unquote. I wonder if he meant harmonic or if he meant harmonious. Putin is generally very careful about his choice, of words. But anyway, let us go further. The top sessions, for further reference, all the above could be followed live during the frantic 2.5 days of forum sessions. This is a sample of what were arguably the most engaging. The broadcast should be very helpful as references going forward, all the way to the BRICS Summit in October and beyond. The BRICS Summit is going to be in Kazan, which is in Russia. I had characterized it previously as being in Kazakhstan. That's an error of mine. On the Northern Sea Route, NSR and Arctic expansion. Best motto of the session, quote, we need icebreakers, unquote. The essential discussion to understand how the global trade supply chains are not reliable anymore and how the NSR, the Northern Sea Route, is faster, cheaper, and reliable. On the BRICS expansion, on the BRICS goals for a true new world order, on the 10 years of the EAEU, on the closer integration between EAEU and ASEAN, the BRICS Plus Roundtable on the International North-South Transportation Corridor, that's the INSTC, which we've been covering. Actually, we covered part of that just last week, when I went over a stream, of Douglas McGregor's, which was focused on the INSTC. This session was particularly crucial. The key actors of the INSTC are Russia, Iran, and India, all BRICS members. Actors on the margin which will profit from the INSTC, from the Caucasus to Central and South Asia, are already interested to be part of BRICS Plus. But Igor Levitin, a top Putin advisor, was a key figure in this session. The Greater Eurasia Partnership, the GEP. This was an essential discussion of what is eminently a civilizational project, in contrast with the collective West's exclusionary approach. The discussion shows how GEP interlinks with SCO, EAEU, and ASEAN, stresses the inevitable complementarity of transport, logistics, energy, and payment structure all across Eurasia. Paglatsiev, Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk, and former Austrian Foreign Minister Karen Bagneisel, always ultra sharp, are key participants. Extra astonishing bonus, Adil Umari, Acting Minister of Labor in Taliban, Afghanistan, interacting with his Eurasia partners. Excuse me for a moment while I take some necessary pills. On the philosophy of multipolarity. Conceptually, this session interacts with the GEP session. It offers the perspective of a concise, intercivilizational dialogue under the framework of BRICS Plus. Alexander Dugin, the irrepressible Maria Zakharova, and Professor Zhang Wei of Fudan University are among the participants. On polycentricity, that involves all global majority institutions, BRICS, SCO, EAU, CIS, CSTO, CICA, African Union, the renewed but not aligned movement, the NAM, Glatziev, and Maria Zakharova, Senator Pushkov, and Alexei Moskov, Director of the Institute of Asian and African Studies at Moscow State University, discuss how to build a polycentric system of international relations. Sounds wonderful. As Project Ukraine faces doom, Finally, it's inevitable to contrast the hopeful, auspicious mood at SPIEF with collective West's hysterics as Project Ukraine faces doom. Putin made it quite clear Russia will prevail no matter what. The collective West may rekindle, quote, the Istanbul solution, unquote, as Putin noted, but modified, quote, based on the new reality, unquote, in the battlefield. Putin also deftly diffused all the prefabricated, nonsensical nuclear paranoia infesting Atlanticist circles. Still, that won't be enough. On the packed corridors at SPIEF and in informal meetings, there was total awareness about the hegemon's desperation-fueled warmongering, master's, quote, defense, unquote. There were no illusions that the current dementia, posing as, quote, foreign policy, unquote, is betting on a genocide, not only for the sake of the aircraft carrier, of the, quote, aircraft carrier, unquote, in West Asia. The aircraft carrier is Israel, of course, but mostly to cow the global majority into submission. That would raise the serious possibility that the global majority needs to build a military alliance to deter this planned global war. Russia, China, of course, plus Iran, incredible Arab deterrence with Yemen showing the way, all of that become a must. A global majority military alliance will have to show up one way or another, either before the incoming planned disaster to mitigate it, or after it has totally engulfed West Asia into a monstrous, vicious war. Ominously, we may be nearly there, but at least St. Petersburg offered glimmers of hope. Putin, quote, Russia will be at the heart of the multipolar harmonic world, unquote. Now that's how you clinch a 1-hour speech, says Pepe. So that was really, I think, a wonderful and hopeful piece of work, and it outlined for us the main features of the conference, I think. And it was so important and so hopeful for that reason, and it gave us links to what was really going on as well. There's something else I want to bring in here, though, with respect to Pepe. Today, Pepe had a live stream. Oh, wait, I should get out of this. Pepe had a live stream at Danny Haifong's. Okay, Danny, and Pepe are fairly friendly now. Where is everybody tonight? Asks Kay. Yeah, where is everybody tonight? Usually these streams have twice as many people as we're having now. But this is a stream of Danny's. It's entitled, where did the title of it go? Pepe Escobar, Russia readies for war with NATO as Putin drops bombshell on the US dollar. What I wanted to cover, at least for tonight on this, was the very last part of Danny's conversation, with Pepe, because it really talks about the fly, in the ointment of BRICS expansion, all the business deals that are being done to put together Europe, and Asia, the continent, of Eurasia, all the deals that are being done in the north-south transportation corridor. Really important stuff. I want to pick this up around 52 minutes in, 51 minutes and change.
And let's say it's the sister war of the war in Novorossiya, which is a war against the populations of Donbass, something that I saw for myself firsthand, and something that is being completely eliminated from Western perception, views, and compassion.
Sorry about the buffering. It will come back shortly. Once he finishes with his remarks on Donbass, which are very brief.
10 years, in fact. The population, the civilian population in Donbass that was being exterminated in slow motion for the past 10 years simply doesn't exist in the West. As much as the Palestinians, thousands of killed, thousands of wounded, they simply don't exist. They are mere numbers, in fact. They don't have faces, they don't have lives. For the NATO-stan brainwashed masses, they don't exist. And all that is, of course, supported, totally supported by the whole NATO-stan sphere. The elites. I'm not talking about the populations. So not populations are not the story. There are people who simply cannot live with that, live in different parts of Europe, but there's nothing they can do because they are excluded from the corridors of power. But the elites,
of course, he's quite right about that. All of us who are very bothered by what's going on, okay, in Gaza, okay, in Palestine, okay, all of us who condemn what's going on and view it as a severe violation, okay, of international law and war crimes, okay, and genocide, okay, and everything else, we are just excluded from the halls, okay, of power. Okay, in fact, I think most people are excluded from the halls of power when it comes to foreign policy, except for a very, very, very small elite that gets to do what it wants to do. Because the presidency is impregnable in the short run. It's only impossible in extreme circumstances to impeach and convict a president. Very, very extreme circumstances. Okay. Impeachment is a lot easier than conviction, which is what brings the removal of the president. And furthermore, all we can do is just wait, okay, until the elections to see if we can replace, okay, the president. Okay, all we can do is sit, okay, and watch this go on. And Pepe gets into the details of that now.
all of them across NATO-stan, from North America to Western Europe, they are part of the genocide. They are killing Gaza and Palestine as much as the Talmudic, psychopathological, genocidal thing over there in West Asia. And of course, we have not found a solution for it. So, in a sense, we are handicapped in the construction of the multipolar, multinodal, harmonic world because, let's say, the remnants of the old system, the system that is dying, the old order that is practically dead, to paraphrase Gramsci in a sense, it's still there. And this old order legitimizes and normalizes a genocide. And the whole planet cannot do anything about it. So it's a sentiment of impotence and grief and extreme sadness. So the only practical way to finish with that would be, of course, on the battlefield, would be a military defeat of Israel. And nobody knows how to pull that off. Of course, there are ideas here and there. General Soleimani, who conceptualized the axis of resistance, he had ideas of how to win in the battlefield. But this is a long process. This is not something that you can do in months. It's a very, very long process, just like the axis of resistance was formulated years ago. And only now we are seeing it working together in front of an uber serious problem. And still, it's not enough for them to win in practical terms. So this is our dilemma, and that's what makes us so impotent in the end, you know.
Yeah, and one byproduct of this impotence and this grief that you speak of is a distortion that happens, especially in the collective West, because we see it. You know, there's a lot of empathy and solidarity with Palestine, and I think that is a great thing. But then, even amongst folks that follow our work, will express their disappointment in, let's say, the heartlands of multipolarity, Russia and China, and their responses, without taking into consideration everything you just said in terms of how this genocide really does expose the complexities and intricacies of what it means to respond to the conditions laid before us by the hegemon, by its genocidal partners, and how that's means that this is more of a process, one that cannot be simply accelerated just because in our minds we wish we could will it to. But I think John Weiwei said it so beautifully. He said, you know, multipolarity is an experiment. He said this, I think, during the panel that I don't know if you were part of or you attended, but he spoke about how, you know, it's a Chinese philosophy to just do and see what happens. I think that's what multipolarity really is. It's Russia, China, and everyone, you know, allying with multipolarity. They're doing and seeing what happens, and then they're seeing what happens in the rest of the world, and then doing what they can. But as you said, what is possible is not always necessarily everything that we want. Maybe final comments on that.
Exactly, and you can feel, Danny. There's a measure of restraint mixed with exasperation when the Russians and the Chinese talk about Palestine. They tend to focus on UN process when everybody knows that the UN is a corrupt machine and the UN is incapable of enforcing anything. They manifest when they talk about a Palestinian state. They don't specify how everyone is going to accomplish the formation of a viable Palestine state when you look at the map and when you look at the consequences of the genocide. You know, so in many aspects, you know, to be frank, they look like pro forma declarations, even coming from Russia and China, and coming from the rest of the global south, and coming from the Arab nations as well. When you see Saudi Arabia talking about Palestine, is like, you know, it's extremely measured and uncompromising, in fact. So all that is saddens all of us, in fact, because we don't see anything practical in terms of forcing Israel to start thinking seriously about what they're doing. And this is not coming from anybody. I would say that the vanguard is the Houthis, once again, with a simple measure, and they proved solidarity in the lands of Islam trumps everything. It's the most important thing. But apart from that, not much.
And that, of course, was a very important point. No one expected the Houthis to put the obstacles they have put in the way of Israel winning that war. That was a total surprise. It was the poorest, of the Arab nations, the very poorest, and what one might have thought was the most powerless, and yet they've put themselves on the line for Palestine itself.
You know, Hezbollah, they have some serious practical preoccupations because they have to be prepared for a suicidal Israeli attack, which is going to kill a lot of people in Lebanon. So they need to be very practical about it, and they cannot provoke Israel for nothing, and they never do. They are too clever for that. They are they're excellent strategists, Hezbollah. And Iran, of course, it's they look from the outside, and they know that the only way that they could turn the game would be a real war, and they don't want it. They need to protect the Iranian economy. They need to protect the fact that Iran now back in Eurasia is going to become one of the most important nodes of this multi-nodal world as a Eurasia unifier, integrator, you know. So, these people in Tel Aviv, they think they can get away with it, which is what's been happening for the past few months. They are getting away with it. It doesn't matter the judgment of history, which will be very harsh, but this is in the future where everybody will be dead. They don't care. And their obsession for the final solution of Project Zionism trumps everything else. And of course, what to expect from Washington. It's in their pocket. It's very easy, So it's a very sorry state of affairs, to be frank. I think all of us, at least, we try to compensate our frustration, pointing the positive aspects of this new integration, multinodal, harmonic, polycentric process across the global majority. But sooner or later, there has to be a serious, examination deep down in the unconscious of the global majority. So how do we deal with that? And is there anything practical we can do to stop a genocide in the 21st century, which is something that nobody would ever imagine would be possible? And there you go, in front of our eyes, and it simply won't go away.
Yeah. And as you said, these practical concerns, Hezbollah has them, Russia has them, China has them. And I always say this one thing, maybe to close with you, Pepe, is
Yes.
all of these forces in the multipolar world understand, we used to use the word restraint. Who does not have restraint? That's what makes this so complicated when people say, oh, well, militarily, just look at what Russia can do. Look at what China can do. Look at what Iran can do if we look at this particular issue with the genocide. Well, so, Israel at least has 200 nuclear weapons. The United States has nuclear weapons. They are not restrained. When they see an existential crisis in front of them, they choose one method and one method only, and that is war to address it. And Russia, China, Iran, they do not want to see what the catastrophe that would unfold if something were to move further. Even look at Operation True Promise, such an amazing development, just exposing the weaknesses that is this invincibility of Israel and the United States as well. But if they went further than that, the United States and Israel are always more than willing to use their trump card, which is nuclear annihilation, and they are the only forces, including their vassals, that are.
So let me say that it really isn't so clear to me that the United States would play that particular trump card. We've been very aggressive at pushing things up to the edge. But in past history, of course, from the Kennedy-Khrushchev agreements on, for 20 years, okay, into the middle 1980s, we moved away from the nuclear catastrophe. We've done it before. The situation has changed now, but the potential for the United States to do it is, I think, still there. When it comes right down to it, I don't think that Joe Biden will be the first to start, okay, a nuclear war. And I don't think Vladimir Putin will be the first to start one either. So I have to say, except for the possibility of accident, okay, I still don't think that one will start.
Are maybe stupid enough, rabid enough, diseased enough to even contemplate such a thing.
You're right, and this is Danny. I say we talked about this before. In Russia, when you touch the subject, basically, people in power or close to power say, "Look, we have a war. That war is not our war. Our existential war is NATO on our borders," and they are absolutely correct. There's so much they can do to defend Palestine. And for China, this is very, very far away. So China, of course, but don't expect direct involvement from China. So it's not going to happen.
Right.
So the only major actor left is Iran. But as we run the previous leadership and certainly the next one, I'm assuming Saeed Jalili might become the new president, and he will be a sort of Raisi 2.0, doing what Raisi and Abdullahian were doing before. With Bagheri Khani, who was in Nizhny Novgorod early this week, would be his foreign minister. Extremely competent. Both are extremely competent. But they know, look, we cannot risk the Iranian economy on a war that everybody's going to lose. And it could involve nuclear weapons, considering how crazy is the other side. So that's the problem. And as you said correctly, the other side, they are irrational and demented enough to go nuclear. There's no question about that. Everybody knows that. And that's what makes it so, it's an unsolvable situation still.
Yeah.
And so that, of course, is the fly in the ointment. Putin may not be the first. Biden may not be the first. But it may be that Netanyahu and the Israelis will be the first, okay, to go, okay, to nuclear war.
Exactly. And as you said, Russia is NATO, and then China's very far away. And imagine if China were to directly get involved. It already has U.S. assets, military assets surrounding it, right on its doorstep. as close as 6 miles from the
Yes, absolutely.
coast of Fujian province. So with, that's very close. Kinmen Island
That's
is
very
very
close.
close.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But Pepe, I know I've kept you over the hour that I had you. So
Thank
anything
you.
that you'd like to plug before you go? This is actually you're my last guest for the month of June because I am actually going away, as I told you. I'll be in your at least where you rest your head most of the
Are you
time
are
while
you going
you
to
are not
Asia?
there.
You're going
No,
to
no,
Asia?
I'm just going to be in Spain and Paris for a bit
Okay.
of a break, but then I will be in China in late August. If you happen to be in China in late August,
I, I I am
early
going,
September.
but probably in July. And
Well,
in August I'll be mostly in Thailand.
right. Well,
You know,
get ready to
trying
bake,
to
I guess.
relax a little bit for the second part of the year, which is going to be wow, a marathon. We don't stop. It'll be
Dress lightly if you're in Beijing or Shanghai in July.
Shanghai.
It's so
Yes,
hot.
Shanghai is sometime in July. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
you're
And
gonna
very
be
important because there's this preparation for this NDB
right.
conference seminar in September about the
Great.
unit and about payment systems. Well, okay,
Well,
I'll
yeah.
leave you all with the auspicious aspect. Let's not be so somber. Okay, it is somber. It's horrible. But let's try to be optimistic and dream a little dream to remember the mamas and papas of the harmonic multinodal future in front of us.
Indeed, indeed. And we'll have to connect next month, Pepe. I'll
Yes,
to see where
definitely.
you're at and then come back on here and talk about all these things because I'm looking.
Okay, so that's it. So Pepe is very pessimistic about the Middle Eastern situation and very much believes in the possibility that Israel will go nuclear to make the war, okay, a regional war and force everybody in. But let's think about this. If Israel goes nuclear, then if the Iranians begin to perceive, okay, an attack, they have already said, okay, to the Israelis, okay, and I think we have to believe them, that they have the capability to detect, and of course they do have satellite information from Russia and China. They have the ability to detect any major attack that is coming from Israel to set the situation onto nuclear. And they have their rockets and missiles and drones, okay, on automatic. And we know what those missiles can do in a stage attack with drones and rockets and cruise missiles first. And then with ballistic missiles, we know the ballistic missiles can get through. Now, I think it was Scott Ritter, or maybe Colonel McGregor, who said that the word is that Iran now has at least one nuclear device which is operational and couldn't be put on a missile. Depending on the power of that particular nuclear device, okay, I hate to say this, but if Israel goes nuclear, okay, then Iran is in a position to deliver a nuclear response. If they have a thermonuclear bomb, and they should use it, okay, in defense, it seems to me that alone is the end of Israel. It's such a small area. Such a small area. But also Iran can devastate it with conventional warheads on those missiles. The recent attack on Israel, okay, by Iran involved 350 objects. 9 got through. They did not have very devastating warheads. They were sent, okay, to military targets. They weren't sent to population areas. I read somewhere, I wish I could remember where, that the total stock of drones, missiles, cruise missiles, and so on that Iran has at its disposal is just huge. It may be, okay, it may number, if you count the drones, okay, it may number in the hundreds of thousands, okay, of objects. I think Iran could deliver an attack, okay, on Israel. That was 100 times greater than the attack that they just made. And this one could be directed at civilian areas as well, okay, as military areas. Such an attack, 35,000 objects, with perhaps 900 getting through, would absolutely destroy the Israeli regime and would absolutely destroy, okay, Israeli society. The Israelis must know that if they gamble on a nuclear attack, or what looks like a nuclear attack, okay, to Iran, their society will face destruction. They can't take 900 ballistic missiles getting through. Tel Aviv will be devastated. Haifa will be devastated. Smaller cities would be devastated. All the settler areas will be devastated. If the Iranians are smart enough to leave Ben Gurion Airport alone, certainly the settlers will be out of there in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Maybe some of the Israeli planes would get through to drop their loads. Perhaps some of the F-35s that Israel has would get through. And it wouldn't take much to devastate some of the cities of Iran. But Iran is a huge area. And its nation and its society would survive that kind of attack. Just thinking this through, I think it would be suicide for Israel to escalate, okay, in this way. So to summarize tonight's stream, the St. Petersburg Economic Conference added to the momentum of the Eurasian integration, which is currently going on, added to the momentum of the emerging multipolar, also multinodal, polycentric, and harmonic world that the powers of Eurasia are trying to create, added greatly to the momentum with all the business deals that were done, evidently, at that particular conference. Other major events are happening over the next months. More minor events over the summer. Okay, then of course the big conference coming up in September, okay, on the currency. And then the BRICS conference in October. We're going to see an explosion of activity, an explosion, okay, of integration. We'll see more atrocities in the Gaza war, more destruction, okay, and more killing. What we probably won't see is the destruction of Hamas. So while the integration continues to go on, we will also probably see the genocide continuing to go on. I have to say that I don't know how long Israel can last. Its economy must be in a shambles by now. Hezbollah is increasing its attacks, essentially neutering the northern part of Israel, making it non-functional and making it a burden, okay, on the state. The Houthis will continue and will accelerate their death by 1,000 cuts, small pinpricks that, however, will accumulate, okay, against Israel and against, okay, its economy. We will be asked by Israel to bring forth more and more and more money to defend it. But I don't know that America is going to respond. The recent, what was it, 17 billion that went to Israel as part of the funds package, where 61 billion, was given, okay, to Ukraine. I think the Republicans are increasingly tired of handing out such large sums, okay, of money. And some of the Democrats are too. And with the election approaching, I don't know what the appetite will be to come up with more and more money for Israel to keep its economy afloat. That may begin to be a problem for Israel. I see Israel getting weaker over the summer and not stronger. So I see the genocide weakening somewhat in terms of its success. Of course, many more civilians will be killed. There will be much suffering. There will be famine. It will be a huge disaster. But I think more and more of the Middle Eastern nations will be deciding to take some actions. I think Turkey will decide to cut off the oil from Azerbaijan, which is going into Israel. That will be a problem for Israel. The Houthis will increase pressure. It seems to me over the summer, it's going to become apparent that Israel has to come to the table, okay, and has to settle. If we should get lucky, okay, if the regime of Netanyahu falls and is not replaced by a more right, fanatical regime, I think the successor regime, okay, to Netanyahu may be willing to have a ceasefire and to sit down and talk. That will put a stop to the genocide for a while. Meanwhile, through this time, I think the Ukraine war will be over. I don't think it would last until 2025. I don't even know if it's going to last, okay, until the fall. I think the Ukrainians are increasingly in a state of collapse. Once the Russians impose their victory there and change that particular situation, then I think the collective West will increasingly lose its appetite to support the genocide, okay, in Gaza. We see some of the European countries already breaking off and going their way. We see elections in Europe weakening the thrust of those who've been supporting, okay, the genocide. Pretty soon now, we may see the US and Israel are much more isolated than they are today. They'll probably still have the support, okay, of the British, because if Starmer wins, he will probably still be as stubborn as Rishi Sunak was in supporting the Israelis. Unfortunately, unless there's a miracle, okay, in the UK, they will still be there supporting the United States. Canada will still be supporting, okay, the United States. But I think the rest of Europe is going to be tired of war and won't be wanting to give a lot of support, okay, to the genocide. Some nations in Europe have too much respect for the International Court of Justice to keep on going this way. I don't think the US is going to have its way in pressuring them so much anymore. Also, the rebellions in Latin America, okay, against the genocide, okay, are going to continue. Perhaps we can avoid a crazy reaction by the Israelis. Perhaps the genocide can come to a kind of rumbling halt and then get lost somewhere, okay, in the negotiations that are to follow. So I'm holding out that kind of hope. As I said before, I don't think Putin is going to be the first one to start a nuclear war in Europe. I don't think Biden will be the first one to start, okay, a nuclear war, okay, in Europe either. If a nuclear war starts, I think it's going to be, okay, in the Middle East and not, okay, in Europe. And I think maybe the Iranians can handle it. And I think the Russians will be in a position to support them if that time comes around in, let's say, the late summer or the early fall. We could even have a collapse of Ukraine now in 2, 3, 4 weeks. I think the Ukrainians are buckling. I think the Russians are increasing the pressure. So I'm holding out some hope here. Anyway, April says, I'm getting to your comments now. April says, "Oh, fantastic, Joe. You had time to review it." Danny and Pepe, I had not. Yes, I did. I saw it. Danny won't get caught dead in China's hot summer. He said he learned his lesson, laugh out loud. Well, he said he's going in August. Probably still pretty hot in August. He said it was very hot in Shanghai, so maybe he'll go to other places in China other than Shanghai that aren't quite as hot. April asks, Pepe thinks Israel is suicidal. Well, remember, Israel is not entirely monolithic, even though it often seems so. I think there's a part of Israel, the right-wing fanatics, that are suicidal. They think God is on their side. They think they might be able to win, a nuclear war. So I think there are suicidal elements there, but whether they will be in control of the military and in control of the government, that is another thing. You still need to have the military in Israel actually trying to deliver nuclear weapons on Iran. And Iran is already primed for automatic delivery of their conventional arms retaliation, with, of course, the possibility that they might arm one of their missiles with a nuclear warhead and direct it at, say, Tel Aviv. That kind of a combined retaliation from Iran would do much to finish Israel. I don't know if Israel is in a position to survive that. I know they have the bomb sellers. They have bomb sellers everywhere, but I don't think those bomb sellers are as deep as the Gazan tunnels. I think they're much more shallow. And besides, there's not going to be any warning. This time, Iran is not going to make advance warning of the missiles' arrivals. The Israelis might have only a few minutes. April says, right. Scott said that Israel would basically destroy itself because of its own location. I think Israel has a proton or neutron atomic bomb, and it kind of works like a domino effect, but I read. If it has a neutron bomb, then that would not create any radiation. But radiation is a problem. In other words, that's a problem for Israel. But I don't think Israel is going to drop a neutron bomb on Israel. I don't see that a neutron bomb is going to help them much. I don't know what you mean of a proton bomb. I haven't heard of any such thing. And it kind of works like a domino effect, but I read that years ago. Turkey just needs to stop letting things get through their country to Israel. April says, I see Gans got his arse out of there, laugh out loud. Joe, did you know the Houthis hit the Eisenhower? Yeah, I did know. I don't know how much damage they've done. And Andy says, or April, I should say, says, Hamza accepted the ceasefire proposal today. I noticed that. But did the Israelis? They're the big problem. Is the DNC going to switch out Busher for someone else, in your opinion? I don't know how good my opinion is about this. They've been so irrational to let him go down this road for so long without actually switching him out. Now James Carville is calling for him to step out. And he's usually a pretty good weather vane about how things are going, at the DNC level. But of course, in continuing to follow the policies he's following, that is continued support. Okay, here's a key question. Yeah, there's the ceasefire proposal, but Israel has said they won't accept one which is a real permanent ceasefire proposal. They've said nothing will stop them from continuing the genocide. Of course, they don't call it a genocide, but they say nothing will stop them. So, if nothing is going to stop them, that ceasefire is not going to last for very long. Once it goes up in smoke again due to the Israelis, and Biden still insists on not stopping the shipments of arms to them, then again you have a situation where Biden's popularity is going into the tank even more, where the Democrats will perceive he has no chance to win. It's very late in the game now. It's almost July. But if the Democrats were to put in a fairly well-known figure, like I suppose it's got to be Gavin Newsom. Well, of course, there's one person they could turn to who would probably switch the whole thing around, but they'll never turn to him. So probably Gavin Newsom is who they would turn to, okay, in this particular situation. And if Gavin Newsom was pragmatic enough to pressure Israel to stop the fighting, we might have a stopping of the genocide after all. Yep. John B. says, Joe, do you think Erdogan's successful take-up of BRICS might start the disintegration of the Eurozone? Must be very tempting for others to join the BRI stimulus programs. It could be the momentum created by 40 more nations joining BRICS, okay, is going to be terrific. Whether it's going to completely destroy the Eurozone, start a major disintegration, I don't know. But I could see certain nations trying their best to get out of the Eurozone. Though I'm not sure a nation like Hungary couldn't be both in the Eurozone and in BRICS at the same time. That would be interesting, because remember, BRICS is not a common market type of thing. April says, yes, I agree with you, John B. It would be very tempting for others to join the BRICS stimulus programs, which will be coming from the new development bank, yes. It's, but also just the increased business activity across the Eurasian sphere is going to be very, very stimulating. I think the BRI stimulus programs come down to loans and grants made by the new development bank and from the Chinese, who have all those dollars to get rid of. They still have all those dollars, to get rid of. So they could actually lend that currency to BRICS nations. I know that works against, the adoption of the new common currency for trade. But you can have two things working against each other for a while in a period of transition. April says, thanks, Joe, for answering all my inquiries. You rock. Thank you, April. John B. says, wouldn't Obama staging a return be the magic DNC needs? Yeah, but he can't stage a return to the presidency. I mean, there's still the 10-year limit. I think a lot of the luster is off of Obama, though. But I do agree he'd be a more attractive candidate than Gavin Newsom, though. But I think Gavin Newsom is probably attractive enough to beat Trump. I think Trump is very strong among maybe 30% of the voters. Okay, but I think that quite a lot of those who would vote for Trump, if it's a Trump and Biden situation, don't really like Trump that much and might be persuaded to go over to Newsom. So I think they might turn to Newsom. He's the most likely person they would turn to. Of course, the person who could beat the pants off Donald Trump, they won't turn to. And that person is Bernie Sanders, who could still beat the pants off Trump. John B. The con people are still ignorant of real Obama. A national emergency would enable a waiving of rules, quote unquote. It wouldn't enable a waiving of a constitutional amendment. Obama is limited to 10 years through the constitutional amendment. Now, he could be elected, I suppose, in a national emergency, and make the promise that he would resign after he's hit the 10-year mark. But then who he had as his vice president was very, very important. It wouldn't be possible to continue on with Harris. He'd have to have someone who is attractive as his vice presidential candidate. Maybe that would be a role for Gretchen Whitmer at that point. She might be perceived as a competent sort of person who might take over the presidency after the first 2 years of an Obama administration. I think Obama can probably still beat Trump, but Trump would unleash tremendous divisiveness this time in running against Obama. It would be such a storm of hate that he would release. He'd have a tougher time with Newsom because even though there are a lot of negatives, of Newsom, he wouldn't be able to galvanize the hate on the right. He wouldn't be able to galvanize the racist hate. So, I think Newsom is probably a better match for Trump. So, I think that's the last of the comments. I'm going to call it quits for tonight. I have to get up tomorrow because Bonnie and I have a jewelry show to do. I will be back tomorrow night with another show on international relations. So I hope you'll join me then. And thank you all for coming. I think attendance was better in the second hour of the show than it was in the first hour. So thank you for coming, and I will see you tomorrow.